Some secrets hide in plain sight, until one day, they explode, shattering everything you thought you knew. Daniel Carter had never questioned his life, his marriage, or his family. But one unexpected rumor changed everything. The sun cast a golden glow over the small town of Fairhaven as Daniel Carter pulled into the school parking lot. The crisp autumn air carried the distant laughter of children as they ran across the playground, backpacks bouncing with each step. He watched for his son Noah, scanning the crowd of students spilling out of the building. Noah emerged from the school doors, shoulders slumped, his usual spark absent. Daniel frowned. His son was typically full of energy, eager to recount his day's adventures. But today, something was wrong. As Noah slid into the passenger seat, he turned away, staring out the window. The silence between them was unnatural. Daniel stole glances at Noah, noting the redness around his eyes. Something had happened. The ride home was devoid of the usual stories about class projects, jokes with friends, or complaints about homework. When they arrived home, Noah wasted no time heading straight to his room, shutting the door without a word. Daniel hesitated, then followed. Inside, his son sat curled on the edge of his bed, arms wrapped around himself. Daniel sat beside him, waiting. Finally, Noah broke the silence, his voice small and unsteady. He had been the subject of cruel teasing at school. The whispers had started small, but they spread fast. Kids taunted him, calling him the mailman's son, saying he didn't look like his father. A sick feeling settled in Daniel's stomach. He struggled to maintain a calm expression, not wanting his son to see the flicker of doubt that had ignited deep within him. He reassured Noah, pulling him into a firm embrace, promising to take care of everything. But long after Noah had fallen asleep, Daniel remained awake, the weight of his son's words pressing heavily on his chest. The next day, Daniel stood outside the school, waiting for another parent. Mark Reynolds. The father of the boy who had started the rumors. Mark had always been the type to talk too much, to let personal matters slip where they didn't belong. When Mark finally appeared, Daniel intercepted him. A tense conversation followed. Mark was dismissive at first, but when Daniel pressed, his expression shifted, guilt flashing across his features. He had overheard something he wasn't supposed to know. A conversation about Daniel's family. Daniel left the encounter with more questions than answers. His mind raced, replaying the past 15 years of his marriage to Olivia. The late nights at work, the unexplained absences, the strange tension that sometimes surfaced and then faded just as quickly. He had never questioned it before. But now, the seed of doubt had been planted. That night, Olivia arrived home late. The scent of expensive perfume and faint traces of wine accompanied her as she stepped through the door. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, papers spread before him, his thoughts a storm of uncertainty. He asked her about the rumors. The moment the words left his mouth, he saw something shift in her expression, a flicker of something unreadable before she forced a laugh. She dismissed the rumors, brushing them off as nonsense, but her reaction only deepened his unease. Daniel pressed for answers. Olivia's smile faltered, her posture stiffened. Then, she turned the conversation against him, questioning his trust, his loyalty. The argument that followed was quiet but sharp, each word cutting deeper. Finally, she stormed out of the room, leaving Daniel alone with his thoughts. Unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong, he searched for answers the only way he knew how. A locked drawer in Olivia's office had always been off limits. That night, while she slept, he picked the lock. Inside, he found a file folder thick with documents. Medical reports. Financial statements. His hands trembled as he scanned the papers, his breath catching when he saw the words, paternity test, negative. The world tilted. The floor beneath him seemed to vanish. His mind refused to process what was in front of him, yet the evidence was undeniable. His son, Noah, was not his. Everything he had believed about his family, his marriage, his life, shattered in an instant. And Olivia had known all along. As he stood there, gripping the folder, one question echoed louder than all the rest. Who was Noah's real father? Daniel sat in the dim light of his home office, the weight of the discovery pressing down on him like an unbearable force. His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages again, as if rereading them might somehow change the reality before him. But the words remained the same. The test was conclusive. The boy he had raised, loved, and called his son for over a decade was not biologically his. His mind churned with questions, each more painful than the last. How long had Olivia known? Had she ever planned to tell him? And most haunting of all, who was Noah's real father? He stared at the ceiling, exhaustion creeping into his bones, but sleep was impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the laughter in Olivia's expression the night before, the way she had dismissed his concerns without a second thought. By morning, Daniel had made a decision. He couldn't confront Olivia until he had all the facts. His emotions were too raw, too volatile. He needed clarity before he acted. With quiet determination, he set out to uncover the truth himself. The first step was to track down the timeline. He pulled out old calendars, receipts, and any documentation he could find, piecing together a map of Olivia's life during the months leading up to Noah's birth. The gaps in her explanations became glaring. Business trips that didn't match her work records, unexplained expenses, and times when she had been unreachable. He dug further, checking old messages and phone logs. There, buried beneath years of history, he found them, repeated calls to a number he didn't recognize. The calls had been frequent for several months, all made late at night, or when Daniel was out of town. His stomach twisted. It wasn't enough. He needed more. Daniel considered his options. If he confronted Olivia now, she would have time to spin the story, to twist the narrative in her favor. He couldn't let that happen. Instead, he needed undeniable proof. Something concrete. He hired a private investigator. Madeline Shaw came highly recommended, a specialist in uncovering personal betrayals with discretion. Meeting her felt surreal, as if stepping into a world he never imagined being part of. He handed her everything he had, copies of the phone records, the medical reports, the notes he had compiled. She listened without interruption, nodding occasionally as she flipped through the documents. "This is enough to start," she said finally. "I'll find out who she's been hiding." The next few days passed in a blur of waiting. Daniel carried on as if nothing had changed. He woke up, made breakfast for Noah, dropped him off at school, and went to work. But inside, he was unraveling. Every glance Olivia threw his way, every touch, every word, it all felt like a lie. Then, late one evening, Madeline called. "I found him," she said. "We need to meet." Daniel's heart pounded as he drove to the designated location, a small cafe on the edge of town. Madeline was already there, a folder resting beside her cup of coffee. She slid it across the table without preamble. He braced himself and opened it. The first thing he saw was a photo. A man in his early 40s, well-dressed, standing outside an office building Daniel didn't recognize. Beneath the photo was a name. Nathan Ellis. Daniel's breath hitched. The name was familiar, too familiar. He swallowed hard, flipping through the additional documents, emails, past financial transactions, even hotel receipts. It was all there, a perfectly preserved history of deception. Nathan Ellis wasn't just anyone. He was Olivia's former boss. The room spun. Memories came rushing back. How Olivia used to talk about Nathan, how she had always been eager to impress him, how she had mentioned his name just enough times for Daniel to notice, but not enough to raise suspicion. And now, the truth was staring him in the face. His wife had lied to him for over a decade. Noah was the son of another man. Daniel closed the folder, his hands clenching into fists. The betrayal cut deeper than anything he had ever experienced. But he wasn't done yet. He had the name. Now he needed a plan. And this time, Olivia wouldn't see it coming. Daniel sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel as the reality of what he had just learned sank in. Nathan Ellis. A name that had once been a passing mention in Olivia's stories about work was now the epicenter of his crumbling life. His mind raced through every interaction, every vague detail that had seemed insignificant at the time. Now, the weight of deception bore down on him like an unbearable force. He needed to confront Olivia, but he had to be careful. If he lashed out, she would go on the defensive. He needed her to admit the truth, to confirm what the documents and photographs already revealed. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. That night, he returned home to find Olivia in the kitchen, casually scrolling through her phone while sipping a glass of wine. She looked up at him and smiled, oblivious to the storm brewing inside him. He kept his expression neutral, setting down his keys with deliberate calmness. "Long day?" she asked, her voice light and unsuspecting. Daniel studied her, wondering how she could be so at ease. How she could carry on as if the past decade of their marriage hadn't been built on a foundation of lies. "Yeah," he replied. "A lot on my mind." He sat across from her, watching as she took another sip of wine. He wanted to throw the folder onto the table, to demand answers, but he forced himself to wait. "I ran into an old friend today," he said casually, gauging her reaction. Olivia didn't flinch. "Oh? Who?" "Nathan Ellis." There it was, the briefest flicker of something in her eyes. A pause, a hesitation, barely noticeable, but there. She masked it quickly, offering a laugh that felt too forced. "Wow, that's random. I haven't talked to him in years." Daniel nodded, playing along. "That's funny, because he remembers you quite well. In fact, he seemed to have a lot of memories from back when you worked together." Her fingers tightened around the stem of her wine glass. "Why are we talking about this?" He took a breath, steadying himself before finally pushing the folder toward her. "Because I need the truth, Olivia. No more lies. No more pretending." Silence stretched between them. Olivia stared at the folder, her carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. Daniel watched as her breathing shallowed, her shoulders tensing. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Does it matter?" he countered. "I know everything now. The phone records. The trips. The real reason Noah doesn't look like me." Tears welled in her eyes, but Daniel wasn't sure if they were genuine or just another act in the long play of deception. Olivia's lips parted as if she were about to speak, but no words came. The silence that followed was louder than any confession. Daniel exhaled slowly, his chest tightening. "How long were you planning to keep this from me? Would you have ever told me? Or were you just hoping I'd never find out?" Her gaze fell to the table, her fingers gripping the folder as if it might disappear. She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. Before she could finish, a noise interrupted them, the sound of a small voice from the hallway. "Dad? Mom?" Daniel turned, his heart sinking as he saw Noah standing in the doorway, his expression filled with confusion and worry. The moment he had been dreading had arrived sooner than he had planned. Everything was about to change. Noah stood frozen in the doorway, his wide eyes darting between his parents. The air in the kitchen had thickened, heavy with unspoken words and lingering tension. Daniel felt a pang of guilt. He had wanted to protect his son from this revelation, but the truth had forced its way into the open sooner than he had planned. Olivia wiped at her eyes hastily, forcing a smile. "Noah, sweetheart, it's late. Why don't you go back to bed?" Her voice wavered, betraying her unease. Noah didn't move. His small hands clenched at his sides, his knuckles white. "What's going on? What did Dad mean about the truth?" His voice was quiet but firm, laced with the kind of fear that only comes from sensing something is deeply wrong. Daniel hesitated. He had envisioned a controlled conversation, a time and place where he could explain things properly. But that moment was gone. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Noah, there are some things we need to talk about. But first, I want you to know that nothing in this world could change how much I love you. You're my son. Always." Noah's frown deepened, his gaze shifting between them. Then why do you both look so upset? Olivia reached for Noah's hand, but he stepped back. A flicker of hurt passed over her face. Sweetheart, sometimes adults have complicated problems, but it doesn't change how much we love you, she said. Her voice had softened, but it still carried that nervous edge. Daniel sat forward, resting his forearms on the table. Noah, I recently found out something about our family. Something that your mom and I should have discussed a long time ago. He took a deep breath, bracing himself. I found out that biologically, I'm not your father. The words hung in the air. Noah stared at him, unmoving, his face unreadable. Seconds ticked by like hours before he finally spoke. What do you mean? Olivia let out a shuddering breath. It's complicated, honey. But the most important thing is that nothing changes between us. Your dad, Daniel, he's been there for you since the day you were born. That's what really matters. Noah's brows furrowed. So you lied? Both of you? His voice trembled, the weight of betrayal sinking in. Daniel shook his head. I didn't know, son. I just found out. But your mother, she knew. Noah turned to Olivia, his expression one of disbelief and growing anger. You knew? And you never told me? Olivia reached for him again, but he stepped further away. Noah, please, I just wanted to protect you. It wasn't about lying. It was exactly about lying. Noah's voice cracked, and for the first time, the tears welled in his eyes. He wiped them away furiously. I don't even know what's real anymore. Daniel's chest ached as he watched his son process the betrayal. He wanted to hold him, to tell him everything would be okay. But for the first time, he wasn't sure if that was true. Noah took a shaky step backward. I need to be alone, he mumbled before turning and running upstairs. The sound of his bedroom door shutting echoed through the silence. Daniel let his head fall into his hands, exhaustion overtaking him. Olivia remained frozen in place, her face pale. Neither of them spoke. The truth was finally out, but the damage had already been done. Daniel sat in the dimly lit living room, listening to the muffled sounds of Noah moving around upstairs. The weight of the night's revelations pressed heavily on him. He had always believed in honesty, in building trust, but now, that foundation had been shattered. He had hoped to shield Noah from the pain of betrayal, but the truth had broken through, leaving wounds that neither he nor Olivia could immediately mend. Hours passed, and Olivia remained in the kitchen, staring at the untouched cup of tea in front of her. She had stopped trying to talk to Daniel, as if understanding that there was nothing left to say. The silence between them was thick with regret, but no amount of words could undo what had already been done. Eventually, Daniel stood and made his way upstairs. He hesitated outside Noah's room, unsure if his son would even want to see him. He knocked lightly. Noah? There was no response at first, then the sound of footsteps approaching the door. It opened just enough for Noah's tear-streaked face to peek through. His eyes were red and swollen, but he met Daniel's gaze with something beyond sadness, something resembling anger and confusion. Can I come in? Daniel asked softly. Noah hesitated before opening the door wider. Daniel stepped inside, noting how his son's usually neat room was in disarray. Blankets tossed aside, books scattered. It was clear that Noah had been struggling to process everything. I know you're upset, Daniel began, sitting down on the edge of the bed. And you have every right to be. Noah sat on the floor, his back against the bed frame. He picked at the hem of his sweatshirt, avoiding Daniel's eyes. I just don't understand, he murmured. Why didn't you know? Why did she lie? Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. I wish I had the answers, Noah. I wish I had known the truth sooner. But what I do know is that you are my son, no matter what a piece of paper says. I have loved you since the day you were born, and that will never change. Noah swallowed hard, his fingers tightening around the fabric of his sweatshirt. But I feel like everything's fake now. Daniel leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. It's not fake, son. The moments we've shared, the memories we've made, the love I have for you, that's real. Nothing about that changes. Noah finally looked up, searching Daniel's face for any sign of deception. Finding none, his expression softened, though the hurt remained. I just don't know what to do now. We take it one step at a time, Daniel said gently. We figure things out together. But you don't have to do it alone. I'm here, and I always will be. Noah nodded slowly, exhaling shakily. Okay. It wasn't full forgiveness, and Daniel knew there was still a long road ahead. But for now, it was enough. He reached out, and after a brief hesitation, Noah let him pull him into a tight embrace. Downstairs, Olivia remained alone, the reality of her choices finally settling in. She had spent years keeping secrets, and now, she had to live with the consequences. For Daniel and Noah, the journey ahead would be difficult, but at least they could move forward, with honesty, and, in time, healing.